On the morning of August 13th, 2018, the Colorado summer air was still and quiet, but in the quiet suburban town of Frederick, something was terribly wrong. Shanann Watts, a 34-year-old mother too, was supposed to go to her 10 a.m. doctor's appointment. She never showed up. She also didn't answer her phone, not her texts, not even her best friend Nicole Atkinson, who dropped her off at home just hours earlier, could get through. Nicole wasn't the kind of friend to wait around. By 12:10 p.m., she drove to Shanann's house and rang the doorbell. No answer. She knocked. Nothing. Her car was still in the garage. Her shoes were inside. Shanann's purse was there too. But she was gone, along with her two daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. Nicole called 911. The police arrived. At 1:40 p.m., Officer Scott Coonrod of the Frederick Police Department arrived at the Watts residence. Nicole was visibly nervous. She handed the officer her phone and showed him a chilling text she'd sent Shanann that morning. "Where are you? I'm worried." Still no reply. Chris Watts, Shanann's husband, wasn't home either. Nicole said he was working, supposedly out at an oil field site with Anadarko Petroleum, his employer. But something wasn't right. Shanann never left without telling someone. She never left the kids. And she never left without her phone. By now, Nicole was begging the officer to force entry. The front door was locked, and the security latch was engaged from the inside. Something or someone was keeping that house sealed. Officer Coonrod called Chris. Chris was returned home. At 1:50 p.m., Chris arrived in his work uniform, seemingly calm, but Nicole immediately sensed something was off. Body cam footage later released shows Chris walking around the house, unlocking the door, and letting the officer and Nicole inside. He was composed, too composed. Inside the home, Shanann's personal items were untouched. Her phone was on the couch. Her purse was on the kitchen island. Her wedding ring was on the nightstand. And the bed, it looked like it had been hastily stripped of its sheets. When the officer asked Chris if Shanann had mentioned leaving or taking the kids anywhere, he shook his head. She said she was going to a friend's house, he mumbled. But even he didn't sound convinced. The doorbell camera that exposed everything. Here's where it gets disturbing. Nicole told Officer Coonrod that Shanann had a doorbell camera system set up through a neighbor named Nathaniel Nate Trinistick, who lived across the street. The officer and Chris followed Nate to his house and reviewed the footage. At exactly 5:17 a.m., Chris is seen backing his work truck into the driveway, an unusual move, according to Nate. For over 45 minutes, the truck sits there. Chris claims he was loading up tools, but Nate saw something different. "There's movement in the garage, but I can't really make it out," he told the officer. "It's just weird, man. He's never backed in like that before." Chris stood silently, watching the footage of himself. When it ended, he turned and walked out without saying a word. As soon as he was gone, Nate turned to the officer and whispered, "He's not acting right." Early suspicions began to mount. By the end of that day, Shanann, Bella, and Celeste Watts were officially reported missing. The FBI and Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the search immediately. A missing persons poster with their photos spread across Facebook. Chris gave a tearful interview to local news. In it, he pleaded for their safe return, saying, "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. If somebody has them, please bring them back." But while the world saw a desperate father, investigators saw something else. The red flags that couldn't be ignored. Why was Shanann's wedding ring left behind? Why didn't Chris seem panicked? Why did he back his truck into the garage that morning? Something he never did before. And why was he texting with his co-worker, Nicole Kessinger, during the supposed search for his family? Even more damning, police learned that Chris had been having an affair. And just like that, a missing persons case turned into a murder investigation. The morning of August 13th, 2018, left a disturbing trail. But the evening brought something even more telling. Video surveillance that turned Chris Watts from a concerned husband into the prime suspect. While friends and family scoured social media for leads and posted photos of Shanann, Watts, Bella, and Celeste, investigators turned their focus to neighbor surveillance systems, specifically one camera that would quietly shatter Chris's story. The neighbor's camera footage. Nate Trinistick, the Watts' next-door neighbor, had a doorbell surveillance system that captured activity on his street 24/7. He invited Officer Coonrod and Chris Watts into his living room. The three men stood silently as Nate rewound the footage from that morning. The footage began at 5:17 a.m., August 13th. Chris's white work truck was seen backing into the driveway, rear first, facing the garage. That alone struck Nate as odd. He never backs in like that. Nate said, over the next 45 minutes, the camera captured faint movement, figures and shadows between the garage and truck. Chris claimed he was loading tools for work, but investigators noticed something else. Where was Shanann? Where were Bella and Celeste? No one else was seen leaving the house. No one. Detectives noticed Chris's behavior. As the footage played, Chris stood awkwardly. His arms were crossed. He rocked back and forth. His breathing was shallow. He refused to look at the screen for long. Instead, he fiddled with his phone and avoided eye contact. And then, the moment that sent chills down Nate's spine, as the video ended, Chris didn't ask any questions. Didn't seem interested in what might have happened next. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room silently. Nate leaned toward the officer and whispered, "He's not acting right at all. Something's off. He's fidgety. He's nervous. That guy doesn't look like someone worried about his missing wife and kids." Shanann's phone tells a story. Back at the house, officers had seen Shanann's phone from the couch. Her lock screen showed her kids. Her inbox revealed more. Shanann had texted Chris multiple times the day before, August 12th, after returning from a business trip in Arizona. She told friends he was acting cold and distant. She'd even written a long message confronting him about his emotional detachment. He barely responded. Worse, her last known activity was at 2 a.m. when she texted her friend, "I'm home," and said she was going to talk to Chris about their relationship. After that, silence. Chris Watts' contradictions began. By August 14th, the next day, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation was involved. Agents began analyzing Chris's interviews, movements, and cell phone data. He told officers. He left for work at 5:30 a.m. Shanann was lying in bed when he left. She told him she was taking the kids to a friend's house. But here's what investigators found. There were no calls or texts from Shanann after 2 a.m. Her car, with the car seat still inside, was parked in the garage. The neighbor's footage showed Chris backing in at 5:17 a.m., not leaving at 5:30 as he claimed. Everything Chris said was falling apart. The media circus begins. While agents began building their case in the background, Chris faced the media. On August 14th, less than 48 hours after the disappearance, Chris gave an emotional TV interview on his front lawn. The video would go viral within hours. In it, he pleaded, "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here." His voice cracked, but the internet noticed what detectives already had. His tears seemed fake. His eyes stayed dry, and his body language screamed guilt. He spoke about his wife and kids in the past tense. And when reporters asked about his relationship with Shanann, he dodged, smiled awkwardly, and scratched his neck, a sign of extreme discomfort. The truth behind closed doors. Meanwhile, investigators uncovered another bombshell. Chris Watts was having an affair. They located his secret girlfriend, Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker at Anadarko Petroleum. Chris had told Nicole that he was in the process of separating and that Shanann and the kids were moving out. She was shocked. She had no idea they were missing, and she immediately cooperated with police. She handed over her text history with Chris, exposing months of flirtation, plans to move forward together, and even Googled wedding dresses. The timing was damning. The affair had begun just weeks before the murders. Investigators close in. On August 15th, detectives invited Chris to the station for a polygraph test. He agreed. That same day, he sat in a small interview room with FBI agent Tammy Lee. who conducted the polygraph. Before it started, she looked Chris in the eye and said, "This is not like TV. If you did something, it's better come clean now." He nodded confidently. He failed the test miserably. August 15, 2018, just 3 days after his pregnant wife and 2 daughters vanished, Chris Watts sat in a small gray interrogation room at the Frederick Police Department. Across the table was FBI Special Agent Tammy Lee, preparing to administer a polygraph. Chris had agreed to it voluntarily, but what he didn't know was that investigators already had more than enough red flags, and this test was the final nail they needed to start breaking him down. The calm before the collapse. Tammy Lee tried to make Chris comfortable. She asked about his job, his girls, even his diet, but everything was leading to one key point. Was Chris telling the truth about what happened to Shanann, Bella, and Celeste? Before the test, Tammy said bluntly, "This is not like TV. You shouldn't take a polygraph if you're lying." Chris nodded. He smiled. He said he had nothing to hide. The test began. He failed. Badly. After it was over, Tammy didn't even wait long. She re-entered the room with Detective Graham Coder and gave it to Chris straight. "Chris, you did not pass the polygraph." Chris looked stunned, but he didn't deny it. "Tammy," pressed him, "what happened to Shanann, Chris? What really happened in that house?" He stayed silent. His hands trembled. He rubbed his face, his arms, his neck. Detective Coder leaned in. "At this point, we can't help you if you don't help us. Something happened, and you need to tell the truth." And finally, Chris whispered, "Can I talk to my dad?" The father-son confession. Within minutes, Ronnie Watts, Chris's father, was brought into the room. He looked confused, tired, and frightened. Chris sat across from him. For a moment, there was silence. Then Chris leaned forward and quietly said, "I did it." Ronnie froze. "What do you mean?" Chris's voice was barely audible. He rubbed his hands together and looked down. She hurt the kids. And then I had to do the same to her." The first false confession. Chris claimed that when he came home from work that morning, he found Shanann in the act of killing their daughters. In a rage, he said he strangled her. It was a shocking claim, but it didn't make sense. Investigators re-entered the room and took over the interview again. Tammy and Graham challenged him. "You're telling us Shanann killed the girls? And you didn't stop her? Where are their bodies, Chris?" He was crying now, but his answers were shallow. "I put them in the oil tanks. Shanann's buried near them." The oil site, Server 319. Chris led investigators to Server 319, a remote oil field site owned by Anadarko Petroleum, where he worked. There, he told them, Shanann's body was buried in a shallow grave, and Bella and Celeste were stuffed into separate oil tanks. Their small bodies pushed through narrow hatches just 8 inches wide. The sheer brutality of it stunned even seasoned detectives. 1 tank for each child, an unmarked grave for their mother, and a cold, calm killer watching the scene unfold, pretending to care. The manipulation unravels. By August 16th, the FBI and Colorado Bureau of Investigation had arrested Chris Watts for 3 counts of first-degree murder and unlawful termination of pregnancy. His wife Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with a son they had planned to name Nico. His story didn't add up. There was no evidence Shanann had hurt the children. Her friends and family were outraged, and Chris's lies were unraveling fast. A few days later, the autopsy reports would confirm what detectives already suspected. Chris Watts had murdered his wife, and then smothered his daughters, one after the other. But at this point in the investigation, the world still didn't know the horrifying truth. Chris's confession was only half of it, and the other half was even darker. Meanwhile, the public reacts. The video of Chris's TV interview, where he begged for his family's return, was now viral. And now, the world saw him not as a grieving father, but as a cold-blooded liar. Internet sleuths, psychologists, body language experts all began dissecting his every word, every blink, every breath. He was dubbed the family annihilator. What haunted people most was not just what he did, but how normal he had seemed. February 18, 2019. Nearly 6 months after being sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, Chris Watts sat down inside the Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin with investigators from the FBI and Colorado Bureau of Investigation. He had nothing left to lose. No appeal, no chance of freedom, no more lies to protect. So, for the first time, Chris told the truth, the full truth, about what really happened inside the Watts family home on August 13th, 2018. It began at 2 a.m. Shanann had just returned from a business trip to Arizona. Chris was already home, pretending to sleep. According to his confession, Shanann got into bed around 2 a.m. She reached over to him. He didn't react. He had already made up his mind. "I knew what I was going to do," Chris told investigators. He waited until just after 4 a.m. Shanann was asleep. The kids were in their rooms. The house was silent. And then he did it. The murder of Shanann Watts. Chris straddled Shanann in bed. He told her they were separating. He said he didn't love her anymore. She cried. She told him he'd never see the kids again. Then he put his hand around her throat and began to squeeze. It took minutes. Shanann didn't scream. Chris claimed she didn't fight much, only a little. He said her eyes filled with blood. He said she didn't struggle as much as he expected. By the time she stopped moving, Bella, their 4-year-old daughter, had entered the room. "What's wrong with Mommy?" Chris told investigators that Bella stood by the side of the bed, watching her mother's lifeless body under the covers. She asked, "What's wrong with Mommy?" Chris told her Shanann was just not feeling well. Then, with Shanann's dead body wrapped in a bedsheet, he carried her downstairs. Bella followed. Celeste, the younger daughter, was now awake too. Together, they watched as Chris put Shanann's body into the backseat of his truck. Then, without a word, he placed Bella and Celeste in the same backseat, right beside the covered corpse of their mother. The drive to Survey 319. At around 5 a.m., Chris Watts drove 45 minutes to the remote oil field where he worked. The entire time, Bella and Celeste sat silently. Chris told agents that Bella didn't say much until near the end of the drive. She looked at the sheet wrapped around her mother and asked quietly, "Is Mommy going to be okay?" Chris didn't respond. The murder of Celeste and Bella. At Survey 319, he dug a shallow grave for Shanann. Then he turned to his daughters. He took Celeste, just 3 years old, and smothered her with a blanket in the back seat of the truck. While he did this, Bella sat right beside them, watching. Then it was Bella's turn. But this time, Bella fought back. Chris told investigators that Bella screamed, "Daddy, no." She struggled. He claimed she bit her tongue and fought harder than he expected. When it was over, he said her eyes were bruised and blood had pooled in her mouth. Then he carried his daughters one by one and dropped their bodies to the narrow 8-inch hatches of 2 separate oil tanks. The final act, Chris buried Shanann, along with the fetus of their unborn son, Nico, in a shallow grave nearby. He covered the site with dirt and returned to his truck. And then, as if nothing happened, he drove to work. The psychology behind it. In prison, Chris told investigators he wasn't sure why he did it. He admitted he'd been fantasizing about a new life. He wanted to be with his mistress, Nicole Kessinger. He said he felt trapped in his marriage and thought killing his family was the only way out. But he never blamed Nicole. He said the decision was entirely his. He claimed he regretted everything and that he saw his daughters' faces every night. But to investigators and the public, his regret came far too late. The nation reacts. When the details of the full confession were released in March 2019, they shocked the nation all over again. The idea that he drove 45 minutes with his daughters beside their mother's corpse, then killed them one by one, was something no one could wrap their heads around. True crime experts called it one of the most chilling and calculated family murders in modern American history. The charges and sentencing recap. Chris Watts pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. On November 19, 2018, he was sentenced to 5 life sentences without parole, plus 84 additional years. He is currently incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin under protective custody.